The other day, my friend and I were having a conversation about black tax, which is something we often talk about. And so she shared a story that in one of her lectures in uni, she studied in a multicultural university. Her lecturer asked how many students in that class often send money back home for extended family support, and it happened that only students from Africa and Asia raised their hands, and so students from Europe and Americas just stared at them in shock. And so my friend told me that every time she tells her friends from Europe or from Americas that she sends money back home for extended family support, they always stare at her in shock and ask her why would you do that. And so this clearly shows that this concept of black tax affects only some of us. And so what is black tax? Black tax is the financial support that black professionals are expected to give to their extended family members. I first came across this concept of black tax in 2016 from reading Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. And in one of those books, he describes what his mom describes as black tax. And so he writes, "My mother calls it black tax because generations who came before you have been pillaged. Rather than being free to use your skills and education to move forward, you lose everything just trying to bring everyone behind you back from zero." And so when I read this concept, that's when I started thinking about my relationship with black tax and how much money I think I should be spending towards supporting my family. And so this is a question for you. How much money do you spend towards extended family support, or how much money do you think we should be spending? What percentage of our salaries do you think we should be spending towards black tax? My name is Agatha from the Wealth Tribe, and this is where we learn how to build wealth together. Welcome to another episode of Wealth Wednesdays, and if you're new here, welcome to the Wealth Tribe. I'm so excited to have you here. And so before we explore the question I posed earlier on how much money do you think we should spend towards extended family support or towards black tax, let us first explore what are the causes and why is it called black tax. What causes black tax and why is it called black tax? So this concept of black tax originated from South Africa. This concept of black tax originated from South Africa, and it's linked to the apartheid policy, where the apartheid policy had very many laws that governed the relationship between the white minority and the black majority. And so what happened is that through these laws, it brought about a situation where the black majority were disadvantaged, and of course the black majority economically got the raw end of the deal. And so therefore this means that in South Africa, because of the apartheid policy, South Africa has the highest level of inequality in the world. And so the black majority in South Africa have been disadvantaged for so many years, and I can give you a few examples of how they are disadvantaged. So for example, despite black people having degrees, unemployment among black people is 40.7%, while that of white South Africans is at 8.5%. The white South Africans, who account for 9% of the population, own 90 to 95% of the country's assets. Black South Africans have to do twice as well as white people just to get the same opportunities, such as jobs. So they often have to work twice as hard or even more. And then black people are forced to pay higher interest rates on homes and vehicle loans. The above and more examples continue to cause huge economic disparities among black South Africans. And so the concept of black tax, or the word black tax, has therefore evolved to capture the racial or cultural aspects or the poor-rich gaps in the world that makes us young black professionals to always have to spare a bit of our money or some of our money to go towards extended family supports. So it has evolved to capture all those racial, rich, poor, and cultural aspects of what we are expected to do with our salaries. And so it's very important for you to understand the origin, because the origin of black tax in this concept, because you don't exist in a vacuum. You, whichever country you come from, whether you are South African or you're Kenyan or whichever African or country you come from, you don't exist in a vacuum. You exist in a bigger system, a bigger economic system that is bigger than you, and sometimes, actually most of the time, it's outside of your control. And so what happens that at the end of the day you're not fully to blame for where you are or how you behave with your money. How you behave with your money is also controlled by the flawed economic system that you exist in. And so these flawed economic systems that we exist in usually causes wealth gaps, has brought about wealth gaps. And so these wealth gaps are the reason why there is black tax in South Africa, and why we have to have this conversation about black tax. And of course, I fully understand that wealth gaps in the world is a multi-layered concept that is caused by a lot of other things, such as colonization, economic instability, historical injustices, structural inequality, racism, education disparities, so many. It is a multi-layered concept. But of course, you have to understand all these things in order for you to understand the history of black tax and why it affects you and why we are having this conversation today. And another thing why I insist that it's important for you to understand the history of black tax, it's because once in a while I often hear poor people being told by privileged people that just pull yourself by the bootstraps. You know, you're poor and somebody sees you struggling and they are wondering why are you in poverty, and they'll just tell you, just pull yourself by the bootstraps and get yourself out of poverty. And as someone who went through poverty in my childhood, I know for sure that I am not to blame for my poverty, and that you don't bring poverty upon yourself, right? You just find yourself in it. It's beyond you. And I often wonder, now that I'm self-aware, now that I'm aware of this, I often wonder, how do these privileged people want us to pull ourselves by the bootstraps if we do not even have the boots anyway? You know, how does a poor person pull themselves by the bootstraps if they don't even have the boots? So it doesn't make sense. And so it's, while we are having this conversation of black tax, I always say that, of course, people who expect us to support them financially are often going through a level of poverty. Most of the time, they're usually going through a level of poverty. But those of us who are expected to support these people also have our own challenges, such as, for example, we are always struggling to keep our jobs. We're always being told we will be fired, being threatened at work that we'll be fired. And therefore, both of these parties, and that's why I insist that this conversation should be full of empathy, because at the end of the day, this conversation should be full of empathy, because as I've said, the person who is expecting money from you is often going through a level of poverty, and you're also struggling in this capitalist world, trying to keep your job where you get that money that you're supposed to send to your extended family members. And as I was doing research for this video, I came across a very mind-blowing quote about black tax. I don't know who wrote this quote, so I don't know who to attribute it to. So if you know, please share with me in the comment section. This is what the quote says: "It's beautiful and tragic at the same time. The desire to look after others is frequently the reason why successful professionals have trouble saving money and building wealth that could make a difference to the next generation." And so now that you understand the history of black tax, we can now dive in and understand what are the disadvantages of black